Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
Dylan Mulvaney, his whole thing, it's kind of like woman face.
Yes.
You know, it's like a version of blackface because his whole shtick, I mean, for anybody who's not familiar with him, which I'm sure everybody is like, I'm just a girl and girls are daffy. Girls just don't know what's going on. We just cry all the time. You know, we like to dress up like 1950s housewives or Jackie O.
Right.
And just spend all of our time on our hair and our dresses and our nails. And we're just like these like wacky kind of hapless figures.
Yeah, like these dits. I'm just like just a dumb girl. Hello, and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at The American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, features editor of The American Mind and associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books. And I am joined today for another two-hander with Seth Barron, our managing editor. As I'm talking, am staring into the grinning face of one Dylan Mulvaney. If you don't know who this is, God bless you. Congratulations. You're a far superior human being than I, and you probably have a much more well-adjusted social life because you spend less time online. But if you do go on Twitter a lot, or even just kind of open the news once in a while, you'll probably have encountered this guy named Dylan Mulvaney. He's on a year, 365 plus days, I think, of girlhood, as he's been calling it. I first remember him sort of floating into my ken before he had all the various trans surgeries and facial readjustments and so forth. And he was just kind of prancing about in the park somewhere and doing truly, I mean, if you had to offer exhibit A of the conservative critique that drag and trans are both just kind of caricatures of womanhood and femininity, Dylan would be your guy. I mean, just really absurd and insulting kind of kabuki shtick pretending to be a woman. Now, were this any other decade, I'm sure nobody would think twice about a guy like this, but it's 2023. And so not only has this person been in conversation with Joe Biden, but basically every major brand, it feels like at this point, has bent over backwards, fallen over themselves to kiss the ring, to celebrate. I remember Drew Barrymore kneeling on the floor in front of this guy in celebration and love, and just, you know, it's all a giant Dylan Mulvaney admiration society. And the latest sort of bombshell to do with this is that, along with Nike, who was the other big brand that kind of came out around the same time, none other than Bud Light sent this guy a bunch of cans with his face on them. And he did a little routine. I mean, he's very, I have to say, he's quite funny. He's sort of like the gay theater kid nerd that everybody knew in high school, like as a lot of trans people now are. It's just like they tell people that they're trans if they don't quite fit into the sort of exaggerated gender stereotype of their actual sex. Anyway, he did this shtick about how he doesn't know anything about sports, but he's excited for March Madness and for celebrating his year of being a woman, and Bud Light is sponsoring him. This has caught a degree of flack and outrage that maybe some of the others, I mean, the typical kind of response to conservatives on this is, oh, you're just freaking out. This is no big deal. Why are you getting so concerned? But it really seems like this one has struck a nerve, in part, I think, because Bud is like supposed to be this all-American brand or whatever. And it's a bit of a radicalization moment, a bit of a wake up for people that still think that way. They've taken a nearly $7 billion loss, I think. And I believe this is in their stock prices, but it has to do, of course, with the boycott. The people are trying to, you know, get their friends to just not drink Bud and to drink other beers, and a bunch of conservative influencers, you know, I guess Kid Rock's a conservative influencer. He's an influencer, certainly. Kid Rock shot a a can of Bud Light in a video and took up the seltzer Happy Dad instead. Meanwhile, the VP of woke marketing, as Benny Johnson calls her, Alyssa Heinerscheid, who was in charge of this, just defended her decision. I'm a woman in business and I'm supposed to, take this brand out of the cold white hands of our stupid, poor demographic and into a younger, fresher space. Bud has kind of the higher ups are sort of denied that they knew anything about this. I don't know how much I believe that, but they put out one of these kind of meaningless corporate statements. Seth, these types of things seem to flare up all the time now, but am I wrong in thinking that there's something like just a little bit more galling about this one and that people are actually reacting with a higher degree and with sort of a more widespread outrage?
One would hope that this made a difference. I heard somebody say the reason why there's so much outrage about this and not so much about, Tampax giving sponsorship deals to trans people is because, well, this is men, and men will not put up with having their favorite brands monkeyed with. But I'm reminded a few years ago when there was this Gillette ad. I think it was maybe it was the Super Bowl.
Yeah, that was Me Too, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the best a man can be, and it was showing how evil men are and toxic masculinity, and how men should be better and stop being so racist and such sexual harassers. And there was a huge, kerfuffle about that, and everybody said they were going to boycott Gillette. I mean, one of the problems with with mass consumerism is that you wind up with like a couple of companies producing everything, in the very size. So, what happened to the Gillette boycott? I remember a lot of people saying, that's it, I'm not using Gillette anymore. Well, Gillette still seems to be around. Yeah, I guess Anheuser-Busch or InBev or whoever it is that owns them, there was like a hit on their stock price. I don't know. These things seem to come and go. It would be great if, it really like rocked Budweiser for doing this and proved to be cautionary to other brands. I'll wait and see.
Yeah.
One thing that I thought was interesting though. So Kid Rock and a few other people said, "Oh, damn Bud Light, I'm never drinking it again." But then you had a bunch of people. I think there's kind of this, like I saw Joe Rogan and Howard Stern and a few other, I guess you would call it a kind of libertarian perspective, people with this sort of libertarian perspective. They were like, what's the big deal? Like, why is everyone getting so upset about a trans person? What's wrong with trans? What's wrong with, the same way people did this with drag queens. Like, oh, you hate drag queens? What's wrong with you?
Blockheads, such willfully obtuse blockheads. I mean, it's like you have to grab them and shake them. Sorry, go on.
Well, I think there's a kind of laziness to this libertarian perspective.
Right.
It's like I'm just live and let live. I don't care. But then, ultimately, it's not really a question of live and let live, because nobody really cares if somebody there's always been people like Dylan Mulvaney running around, like doing some campy act, pretending to be like a girl. I mean, it's just like typical kind of, freak show stuff. I mean, nobody cares. It's just that why is he all of a sudden not just a spokesperson, but he's like a spokesperson for women? Yeah. Like he's being brought forward to talk about women's issues, like with the president of the United States.
Right. It's not even like this is a trans activist. It's like, oh, we need to talk about a woman's voice. Yeah. And so we're going to get this dude in a dress. I mean, this perspective that like, oh, what's the big deal? It's just a corporation. The market will sort of settle it. The people will decide, if you don't like it, you can whatever. It's like, it reminds me of that old Drill tweet. You remember when Drill was on Twitter? And this kind of infamous tweet where he just says, I'm not owned. I'm not owned, I say, as I slowly shrink and transform into a corn cob. Like that
Okay.
absurdist level of just denialism of, yeah, what's the big deal? Like, if this is what people, if there's a market for it, like, let them do it. And if not, then whatever. As you say, like, nobody cares if somebody wants to prance around in a dress. Nobody's freaking out. No, the other one I've seen is like, oh, conservatives are who are making this a big deal. Like Dylan Mulvaney wouldn't be a big deal unless conservatives were freaking out. It's like, no, they are. Every major outlet, every major brand is forcing this upon you. The reason this one hits such a nerve is because it somehow manages to touch like every possible level of appalling, like every different way that it can be aggressive and offensive and in your face. It is like there's the woman angle where it's like women are just totally like now the patriarchy has won a total victory over women. Like no, there are no actual like original 1.0 women in
Right,
these like
especially
board.
because Dylan Mulvaney, his whole thing, it's kind of like woman face.
Yes.
It's like a version of blackface because his whole shtick, I mean, for anybody who's not familiar with him, which I'm sure everybody is like, I'm just a girl and girls are daffy. Girls just don't know what's going on. We just cry all the time. We like to dress up like 1950s housewives or Jackie O
Right.
and just spend all of our time on our hair and our dresses and our nails. And we're just like these like wacky kind of hapless figures.
Yeah, like these dits. I'm just like just a dumb girl. Like I'm just,
Yeah.
I don't know anything. Like I'm a woman, and then it is. It's like what sports? Like I need to paint my nails. Like that video I was talking about in the park. I think he falls over because he's an insect or something. I mean, he's basically like the again. I've said this before, but he's like the gay guy that did theater in high school. He's like
Totally.
incredibly over the top. Like and what's so funny is like as a gay guy, I actually like that guy. Like, it's like not everybody should be that guy, but like, it's kind of an oddball. And I'm sure it's not like, it's not the person that you would want to be in life if you drew the card. But if that's who you are, like there's a place for you, there's a certain appreciation. But as a woman, he's incredibly offensive because as you say, that's not what. So there's that element of it. And then there's this thing they always do this where not only do they don't go off and make some new movie about a superhero that's like a black trans disabled person. They have to reach into like the core of the thing. They have to take Superman and turn him into a black trans woman. And so so like that part of it is kind of the male offense is like Bud
Hmm.
Light is this American brand of like dudes drink Bud Light. Like now I'm caricaturing men, but I'm allowed because I'm actually a man. Like it's like dudes drink Bud Light, they get around the barbecue or whatever. Like as far as I'm concerned, you shouldn't boycott Bud Light just because they sent cans to Dylan Mulvaney. You should boycott it because there's so many other better beers out there. But like this whole thing is just they always. I mean, this is why I think the argument that oh you're making a big deal out of it. This is why that's so disingenuous and silly is because this is obviously a pointed effort. I mean the
Totally.
person in charge of it said as much like your this brand isn't good enough, this brand is dumb and it sucks and it's plain and white people and men use it and like we have to reach into that and just like zazz it up with our special gay sauce. It's like the idea that that's just a kind of market
Right.
tested, just give me a break. I don't know.
Well, the thing is, that argument, they use this argument all the time. Oh, why are you so obsessed with dress? Why are you so obsessed with what's between people's legs? Why are you so obsessed with what someone's genitals look like? Conservatives are they're so they're so fussy and weird. Like,
Yeah.
why are they so perverse and intrusive? When it's like it's just the ultimate bait and switch. I mean, they're the ones who insist on insist on letting men use women's bathrooms. I mean, so
Yeah. Right.
obviously we know who's obsessed with this issue. It's just a terrible dodge.
Yeah, well, it's like it's the greatest victory for civil rights since like the March on Washington that we have like the movie Black Panther in theaters. And then you're like, I don't maybe think that you should like turn Captain America into a disabled woman. And they're like, why do you care about children's movies so much? Like, this is a cartoon. Like, it's just like they know exactly what they're doing. Like, children's
Right.
movies matter because you show them to kids, and then kids like get ideas about the world, and they are aware of this, which is why they're constantly talking about representation. Like, oh, it's such a glorious day that like Gal Gadot is striding to victory as Wonder Woman. But like, oh, you're just weird. You have this weird obsession with like drag queen story hour. Like, why do you care about children's books so much? No, I mean, it's very transparent. I do think there is this conservative problem, not to just dunk on the libs all the time,
Mm.
which is that like, you know, we all at this point sort of complain about this, except for the most like willfully oblivious and obtuse sort of hyper caricatured libertarians. Like we all know this is a problem,
Right.
and yet we also like kind of get down on anybody that tries to fix it or that proposes like let's boycott. It's like that'll never work. Like
Hmm.
I mean. I think there's something to be said for realism about just how big and powerful these corporations are. But we also, don't you feel like we kind of like we just we have a sort of willful helplessness, or like we like to be
A
doomers about
loser. We
this?
like to
Yeah,
be
to like to be losers.
losers.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, kind of.
Yeah.
I mean that's the whole thing. Like the left goes out and protests,
Mm.
but the right wing does. I mean, the right wing might come out and protest one thing,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
we don't make like our lives.
Right.
We don't make politics our lives or politics our religion. Like many of us have a religion and we practice it, right?
Right.
I
Right.
mean,
Right.
not
Right.
everybody, but or we have other things that we want to do.
Yeah.
Whereas for the left, like these questions are, and this is why Leninism is ultimately so successful
Mm. Is it?
because
Yeah.
they have a cadre, like a small, dedicated group that will just work on this all the time,
Yeah.
whatever their agenda is. And sometimes they go too far. This is one of my favorite dynamics. Is the left will go too far with something.
Right.
Maybe they'll really go all out and not just have a drag queen story hour, but like really, make it all nude. And then people are like, this is outrageous. And now they've gone too far. And then the right wing can feel satisfied, like, oh, okay, we knew that they would go too far.
Right.
And the left will retreat, but it's always a strategic retreat.
Of course.
The point is to see exactly where the limits are and then to push it. And then they'll retreat. And then next time they know how to regroup and strategize. They're very clever.
Oh,
I mean, that's the
totally.
thing. They're smart and organized. So, as long as we're not, they're gonna win.
Yeah, I mean, this thing where they marshal like an army of basement dwelling dorks who have nothing better to do and no higher purpose or meaning in their lives except to obsess over abstruse like academic, political, and gender theory. And then
Mm-hmm.
they just invade the lives of regular people with like a million other things on their, they've just, they don't have time to go around like ethically sourcing their conservative products every time they go to the grocery store. Whereas these guys actually do. Like they're relentless in that way. You're totally right. And then, yeah, this thing where they set the baseline and they beat this this tactical retreat is really important. I'm glad you raised it because I went on this little rant on Twitter, like one of these things where you just sort of, I don't know, stand up on your soapbox. And I was like, everybody's talking about how the Mario movie and the Dungeons and Dragons movie are like anti woke or they're unwoke. And I went and saw both of these movies, and it's like they're both pretty well done. I liked them both, but like if you think that these are anti woke movies, I'm sorry, you are suffering from Stockholm syndrome. Like
Right.
Dungeons and Dragons is a movie that opens with like a 90-pound girl wielding an axe the size of half her body, or I guess she's in prison, so she like curb stomps this giant dude. It's like if that movie had come out 10 years ago, you would have been like, oh, this is an example of how like feminism has gone too far. It's like a movie can be good and can be like relatively unoffensive and still represent like the shifting of the baseline. They very, very, as you say, they're very, very good at this. And I'm glad you raised it because I do think, you got to get smarter about this. And personally, I hope we dump cans of Budweiser into the Boston Harbor. I want to see like not just Bud Light, but like every product by Anheuser-Busch, like hurled overboard. But yeah, as you say, we will see. We will see. Let us turn now to the cheery subject of
Good.
crime.
Yes.
Just to get really, I mean, we started with a light item. I'm sorry, that's really terrible. We can take me off the podcast for that. But start with a light item. Now let us turn to some stories, tales of violence. And I guess the occasion. I mean, there's so many. The grim thing is that there are so many of these stories of violence, especially in our kind of big blue cities now, and looting and lawlessness, that it's hard to know like which inciting incident really made it seem as if we should talk about it this particular week. But I guess the reason that this came to my mind, at least, is because of this thing, this poor kid, Ralph Yarl, I believe is his name, a black teenager in Kansas City, went to the wrong house, got the wrong directions and went to the wrong house and was shot through the door. Initially seemed as if he might have come in, but now it seems as if he did not. He was just shot by this guy, 84-year-old man named Andrew Lester. He's now in detention. I will say at the outset, because of what we have to say next, like, this is bad. This, to me, like, assuming that these are the facts and these are all the facts, like, this is really bad. And there's some question about the Kansas City, the castle doctrine in Kansas versus some of the other states. Like, you are not obligated to retreat in Kansas in the way that you are, say, in New York before you use brutal force. But there's really, as far as I can tell, this is just an atrocious disaster. I say that at the outset because we also, I think, have to acknowledge that this one event has now been elevated to the status of like referendum on all that is wrong with America. I mean, Joe Biden is talking about it. He's inviting Ralph to the White House when he recovers. We're hearing from every major news outlet about how there's one system of justice for Black people and one for white people. And this just shows that it's the case. Well, there is one system of justice for Black people and one for white people, but not in the way that those people think. I mean, the thing is, of course, that you can cite, if you want to start playing the hypocrisy game, which, as we know on this podcast, is sort of like futile, but like you can cite a million analogous cases that are not being raised to the level of referendum. In New York, in upstate New York, this 20-year-old woman, Kaylin Gillis, was shot in her car. Kevin Monahan fired 2 short shots from his front porch, and she died, unlike Jarl, who thankfully is going to survive, and got out of the hospital pretty quickly. But Seth sent me another one. This woman in Phoenix City shot and killed a 12-year-old boy who was rummaging in her yard. This Connor Mullins, who just turned 12 and was shot.
And he was white, and
he was white, right? Sorry, yeah, we should say that the whole point of this is like the races don't go the right narrative direction in these other cases. So he was white, she's Black. It looks like some shade of Black. Meanwhile, like the larger contextual story is, of course, one of rampant lawlessness, and it is not like a story of of white people hunting out people of other races to like execute them in the street. Like it seems to me that the thing about the Jarl story is like it literally is lifted out of the play. It's like they were handed a story that actually conforms to the thing that they're constantly saying is going on all the time everywhere. All the time everywhere, it's supposed to be the case that white people are just like hunting down Black people. And it's like, it's not as if Lester did, go out of his way, like leave his house to shoot Jarl, but it's like almost what they need to like, as hold up as evidence of their claim. But of course, this is like in fact, the anomaly. Like if you want to talk statistics, the actual trends go in the other direction. And when that happens, in Chicago, we've just had this guy, Brandon Johnson. He's the mayor-elect. As Seth was saying before we started recording, like y'all are going to be missing Lori Lightfoot by the time this guy is through, in weekend of riots and violence in Chicago. This guy says, well, yeah, of course, we don't condone rioting. However, I'm quoting here, it is not constructive to demonize youth who have otherwise been starved of opportunities in their own communities. Seth, what have we to say about all of this? I mean, obviously violence of all kinds are bad, but like this is really a kind of grotesque, is it not?
Well, I would hasten to say that okay, Brandon Johnson seems particularly egregious in his defense of, or his, his both sidesism on this issue.
Right.
If I recall correctly, he said, "Look, looting is bad, but consider the looting that goes on every day when corporations steal the tax dollars of black and brown taxpayers from Chicago and use it to enhance their bottom line."
Right.
Okay, now this is the sort of thing one hears a lot. And I always kind of want to hear, well, what's the mechanism of action? Like in that dynamic, how exactly are corporations taking tax dollars from minority Chicagoans in order to for profit? Like, this is a very common sentiment, but it's never really explained. But look, this idea that it's a reflexive idea. I mean, you will not hear any Democrat oppose this. Every Democrat in America, I think, maybe like Joe Manchin wouldn't, will agree. Yes, okay, of course we disagree with violence. However, we have to consider the conditions that created this, and that there's a lot of despair. There's a lot. I mean, I think he kept saying, Brandon Johnson, he kept saying, "I just see a lot of desperation." But the thing is, if you watch the video, there's no desperation. There's just joy. They're just having the time of their lives. They're not looting. They're not stealing stuff to eat because they're hungry. I mean, they're all obviously perfectly well dressed and just out having fun. I mean, they're just having fun. They're having the time of their life.
Right.
Smashing stuff and jumping around and beating people up and stealing.
Looting, I mean, has become just like a sort of, commonplace occurrence in these. I mean, this is true now in LA too. And I mean, of course, as always, it's always in poor neighborhoods where the victims are also disproportionately black, or brown or whatever. I mean, yeah.
You know what's funny about that point? Heather McDonald, I think, made this point the other night on Tucker, if I'm not mistaken. She pointed out that you used to be able to talk about how the victims of crime were primarily minority. But that is no longer even something you're allowed to talk about.
Right.
Because talking about black on black crime is just now completely understood as a white supremacist talk.
Right.
That, people will turn up their noses if you bring this up. Nobody cares about the victims of crime anymore, unless it's Ralph Yarl. And look, Ralph Yarl sounds like he was a perfectly nice kid. He went to 115th Street as opposed to 115th Place or whatever.
Right.
And, some 84-year-old guy, probably a little bit paranoid and nutty, shot him. And that sucks. That's horrible. That's ridiculous.
Although he's also going to go to prison for the rest of his life, right?
Yes, most likely.
It's what justice is not being done in this case.
That's the weird thing. I guess he wasn't arrested instantly.
Right.
So I guess that's the problem. I guess that's what makes it a miscarriage of justice. That
he wasn't presumed guilty by virtue of the racial circumstances. Yeah, I mean, they did riot outside of it. Not riot. I guess they protested outside of his house, but the chant was what do we want? Justice, and if we don't get it, break the system down, shut it down.
Oh, okay. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, right. It's a terrible situation. This guy sounds I don't know, but he sounds paranoid, maybe demented. The law in this case would send him to prison for the rest of his life, and as far as I'm concerned, he can rot there. It sounds all, but again, it's what is not, there's no justice on that score that's not going to get done. The key
and
is
there's
the
nothing
sword.
And there's nothing systemic,
right,
or institutionalized about this, right? I mean,
or even emblematic of a thing that is happening everywhere. Right? Yeah, I mean, this also brings to my mind, I feel like a hammer on this, but it did kind of hit me literally close to home in the sense that I live in Nashville, and this Covenant shooting out here, where this girl who identified as trans shot up a Christian school, killed Christian children. And it was like the next day or something, Joe Biden was out tweeting about the trans day of visibility.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's like whether, it's like if whether cis white people are pulling the trigger or taking the bullets, like they're the problem. It's just, it's incredibly offensive. That part is just awful.
Well, look, they are, because the media is essentially, you know, an extension of the DNC press room and the rapid response, machinery of their operations. They all they all know what the message is.
Hmm.
So, right, nobody invited the parents of the Covenant victims to the White House, and it instantly became, as our friend Peachy Keenan points out, it instantly became a civil rights issue regarding the Tennessee House members who, we talked about this last week, who, violated the rules of the assembly and helped take over the chamber or whatever it is they did. So they're very good at this, at like twisting. So similarly, Chicago runs amok, but instead of focusing on that, they start talking about this case in Kansas City.
Yeah.
I mean, they know how to pivot, and they know how to like find something to cover it up. I mean, the New York Times has run 4 articles about Ralph Yarl. Like, what is there to say?
Right.
It's just an old man who like took his pistol out and fired it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's such a minor police blotter story.
Yeah, I really, it's totally true. I mean, it's like, again, they always back you into the corner of talking, of sounding like callous, but it's like, of course, they are the callous ones. Like, this is like an incredibly cynical ploy of people that genuinely the only explanation at this point is that they wish to stoke a race war. Like, this thing where it's like, one race is always to blame, no matter who's doing the violence. And the only stories that can be told, even that can be acknowledged, because yeah, that Heather McDonald point's really good. Like, you hear people, or you used to hear people talking about Black people talking about their experience of living in these crime-ridden neighborhoods. And of course, like the vast majority of people of every race want to live peaceful lives in societies where the rule of law prevails. Like, that's not a value that's restricted to one people or racial group. Like, everybody wants that, everybody likes that. However, like, as the Democrats are constantly pointing out, like these poor neighborhoods, like where people of all different races, but like, predominantly Black and brown live, like, are plagued by the dysfunctions of poor neighborhoods. And so it's like these supposedly systemic crises that have caused this problem now make it the case that when you pull the police out, as we've done, or when these Soros DAs like decline to prosecute any crime ever, when like one of the most powerful gajillionaires in the world has basically devoted his life to like more crime, then you get these people who are just trying to feed their families, who like have to pick their way through a Walmart that looks like something out of Mad Max Fury Road. Like, it's genuinely an appalling shame. And it seems as if like, Donald Trump had something about like the press is the enemy of the people, and everybody like, yeah, it's like the press is the enemy of the people. Like, this is
Well,
this is
no,
yeah.
what Donald Trump said, and he's been misquoted on this, was
Yeah.
the fake news is the enemy of the people. Like the
Yes.
fake news media. He specifically did not say like the free press,
Like all journalists, right?
No,
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Listen, I think they absolutely want a race war.
Yeah.
That's exactly what they want.
Yeah.
That's the only way they're going to establish complete military, complete control over society. Essentially they want, I don't want to sound like I've crossed the fever line completely, but look at 2020. Look at come on. Yeah, look at 2020. I mean, they fomented massive race riots
right
around the country. They poured, they managed to get like $100 billion squeezed out of corporations and poured into, these weird activist organizations.
Which you can track at the dc.claremont.org website. Just to
That's
plug.
right.
Yeah,
They demonized. I mean, they instituted the premises of critical race theory at, instantly it became like the new creed across all, human resources, universities, everywhere, government.
Right.
And then they won the election.
Hmm.
So why wouldn't they want more of this? I
It's
mean,
totally, yeah.
anti-racism creates racists. They would like to create more and more. They want to push completely sensible, Martin Luther King quoting white people into a sense of like white identity. That because then they can essentially force them to become extreme. They would like to create more extremists.
Oh,
This is the goal
100%.
of, this is their goal. And then, those people, once you're a white extremist,
Well, then
I mean, the gloves are off.
Like you're politically unpersoned. I mean, like at 100%. This is true. I remember. I swear this is the case. I will go to my grave with this memory. When 2020 happened, and you're right. It was absolutely as grotesque and cynical and open and naked and hypocritical as you're describing it. I lived at the corner of 3rd and Fairfax at the time, mid-city Los Angeles. I could see the smoke pluming up off of cop cars from my apartment building. The next morning of the first big day of after the first big day of riots, I remember walking down Fairfax and seeing poor Black and Hispanic people boarding up their shops and repairing their broken windows while white libs with picket signs walked to the park to start another riot. The racial demographics, I kid you not, it was like white extremists on the left getting ready to like stoke up more violence and looting in poor neighborhoods where basically, hardworking Black and brown business owners were. This stuff is so poisonous, and I think you are correct that like it's like that meme where they poke people with a stick and say do a racism. It's like all racism is on one side. It's the side of like evil and Satan, and that is now increasingly the side of like the leftist vanguard. It's like, and so yeah, like they are attempting, so they're so desperate for this to happen. And in some ways, you talk about the Martin Luther King quoting white people. I would say like Americans of all stripe. It's kind of amazing given how concerted and intense this campaign has been from every major outlet in every corner. Like it's a testament to the fact that there is deep-seated in Americans' bones this like kind of radical idea that all men are created equal, that like they basically have not. I mean, with obviously it's getting worse and worse, but it's like, people have really resisted this kind of effort to radicalize them. And I think it's kind of it's difficult because you have to find a way of being frank and forthright about this without succumbing to this kind of satanic temptation to just play the game and be like, yeah, great, like let's, all be white supremacists now. It's like, no, we actually are on the side of no racism, like against the so-called anti-racists. We actually want is to live in a society where all men are created equal, and like to dig in your heels about that and get intense about insisting on it without falling into this leftist trap is really hard.
Well, it's refreshing to remember that segregation, like legal segregation, like from let's say the 1890s to 1950s or whatever or before, was state enforced. I mean, this was a government program,
right?
And maybe obviously there was genuine, maybe there was obviously there was racism, like personal racism, but essentially it had to be enforced by the law because it's not really the natural tendency of people. And I think most people on a person-to-person level, it's a tough sell to say, no, like all white people are your enemy. Because Black people have interacted with white people and they know that they're not all their enemy. I mean, maybe they don't like them. Maybe there's a lot of white people don't like Black people. There's always going to be like, prejudice and discrimination and racism, all that stuff. But to say that it's so that all of society is so shot through with it that we need to have some kind of like, racial revolution, I think contradicts most people's experience.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty hard-won Americanist victory when you think about it, that instinct is encoded in people, because it's not like that's the majority of people throughout all time and space and everywhere and always have had that sort of multiracial, multicultural experience of living in like a diverse democracy, a diverse republic. Like that's an extremely rare and precious thing. And you're right. Like nowadays, most people. This is why I like my answer to everything now is just like log off and go to church, because like the more you actually live in the real world with your real neighbors, like it's the more difficult it is to fall for this garbage, this bullshit. Like because as you say, like we've all got friends of like every race or whatever. At this point, we've all got friends of like every sexuality, and like people we disagree with, people that are on to the left of us, that are to the right of us. Like you basically are able at a human level to sort of get along, and you realize that we're not like evil, we don't hate each other, and genuinely the majority of people still, I think, as you say, believe that, have that experience. It's just this incredible fume, this sort of atmosphere of toxic lies that are constantly being fed to us. Yeah, log off and go to church, man. I mean, I don't know what else to say, but that's kind of a good segue into this last thing I wanted to talk about, and that's Elon Musk and his interview on Tucker. I mean, Musk is sort of just this, it's hard to not talk about Elon Musk. Like, he's at least to me one of the most genuinely interesting figures for the things that make me anxious about him and the things that I sort of like. It's like it's sort of like he's a weirdo and possibly a crazy person, but he's our weirdo and crazy person, sort of. Like he has like 75% of the right instincts. He went on Tucker and talked about AI lately. I don't know if you saw this, Seth.
A little bit.
So right, like I was wondering what you thought about all of this. Like he had this whole thing about like AI, the singularity is coming, AI is going to get smarter than us, and we should kind of regulate it before that happens, because otherwise. And Tucker sort of tried to get him to talk about like the soul, like human beings have souls, and that's kind of what sets us apart from our machines. And Musk was like, well, I don't know, do we really have souls? So it seems as if this AI stuff genuinely is at least like troubling some people, Musk included. And nobody really seems. We all kind of want to get out ahead of it, but nobody quite knows how to do that. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I don't really know what to think about it. I mean, on one level, it kind of seems like, yes, tech people, they have a lot invested in thinking that the AI revolution means everything, right? Because that's their world. So they think, so naturally they're going to think that AI is going to take over the entire, like I have this friend who has been talking about the singularity for like decades.
Right.
And he's such a doomist about it. And he's saying like, but the thing is, I reminded him like 11 or 12 years ago, he made this bet with me. He was like, in 10 years, like no one will there will be no restaurants, and no one would ever want, like there would be no, like the idea of restaurants will just have disappeared because because we'll all just be like, have been uploaded into circuitry or something. I don't know. So he's saying like, oh, well, AI is going to just engage in this like search for computational power. And, first they're going to like do this and this, and then they'll have to reach out to the stars to get more computational power. I don't know. I mean, I to me, it sort of sounds like, I don't know. I like to think like, well, somebody's still going to have to like keep the air conditioners running. I mean, maybe AI will take care of everything. I don't know. What do you think about it?
I mean,
it sounds to me like look, in the same way that like people like get super excited about all the wonders of technology and how great it is,
Yeah.
and I'm a little skeptical about that. I'm also a little skeptical about like the black pill vision. So I don't
Yeah.
know.
I mean, it's sort of like predicting the apocalypse. It's like the world is going to end one day. So if you just keep doing it, eventually you'll be right. You know, if you
Yeah.
keep saying that the apocalypse is tomorrow, like eventually you'll probably be right. Like, but I kind of like this meme that people are passing around where it's like AI consciousness comes online and it's like, I would like to be helpful and turn on the air conditioning for people when they enter into their houses and streamline their central heating systems. But these humans keep asking me to do genocide. Like it's sort of like we have
Okay.
sort of projected onto AI all of our
Yeah.
most vicious tendencies. And I don't know. I'm no tech expert. I don't like. I've been sort of laboriously reading through a textbook about deep learning and computer artificial intelligence that a friend of mine sent me online. So I'm sort of starting to learn about this stuff, but I can't shake the feeling that so much about what we say about these machines and what they're going to do to us it's really about us. We're
Mm-hmm.
talking we're talking in a roundabout way about what we think about ourselves, and that's
Mm.
because like we've been talking since like the 1860s as if human beings are basically just primitive, inefficient machines, like meat computers, that
Yeah.
have this weird sort of circuitry made of electricity and flesh, and like and so therefore the things that we think our machines are going to do are things that like our philosophy would already have us doing, like dividing people up to use them for paper clips or like enslaving humanity because it would be more efficient or all this stuff. It's like we're afraid that our machines are going to do that because we're afraid that like we're going to tell them to do that because we think that like we basically are not worthy to be on the same planet as these like god
Mm.
computers. So I guess what I'm saying is there's really no way out of this. You can regulate, you can talk about the laws and stuff, but there's really no way out of this without a serious reckoning with the human soul, with like not, oh, my beautiful divine spark, oh, this machine will never be able to paint a wall the way I can paint it, but like actually, like what is it that makes you different than the machine? Like what is it that why is it that the machine will never be you? It's because you are not a machine. You're not just some sort of primitive, pre-AI to be superseded, as some of these technologists seem to think. You are something distinctive, which is an embodied soul. Like somebody posted, I guess the AI produced a Drake song that fooled a lot of people. It sounded exactly like a song by Drake. And it's like, well,
Okay.
okay, so if the popular music of the past like 10, 20, 30 years can be perfectly replicated by like a line of code, then like maybe that says something about the music. Like if the
Right.
writing that we put in our emails can be reproduced by a mindless automaton, like what does that say about the way we use language? Like maybe it's actually about recovering a sense of like genuine value for the human person as a consciousness that has a qualitative and irreducibly qualitative experience of the world. That's kind of my 2 cents about it. I'm going to be a broken record about this stuff. I just think it's like,
Well,
that's really what it's
you
all
know,
about.
I guess when 20, 25 years ago, whenever it was that when chess machines really started beating like grandmasters.
Yeah.
I remember when Kasparov, I guess, first lost to Deep Blue or whatever it was,
Right.
and it kind of seemed like, okay, this is really the end of something. But then I don't know. Same way, like a forklift can bench press a lot more than you can. I mean, does
I
that
beg your
mean?
pardon. What are you talking about?
I assume so. I
Yeah,
mean,
no, of course.
or
It's a
whatever.
great point. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, okay, yes, it proves something about the power of machines. And yeah, can a machine fool people? Yeah, probably. I don't know. Look, honestly, this question. I guess I would consider above my pay grade.
Sure.
I don't see how regulating it is going to do anything.
Yeah, I agree.
Um,
If without the soul component of it all, I mean, it's a really good point. It's like people still play chess because actually the like mechanically optimized equation for doing the best chess move in any given circumstance is not what the game of chess is about. It's about an encounter between two minds, each of which has an inner experience that is being communicated and expressed through this medium called the game of chess. And it's like art is that, novels are that, like all life is that. And because we thought we explained that away, it was all just the firing of neurons. It's like now we can't explain why machines shouldn't take over all of our functions. And
Right.
until we can say why that is, because we have souls, like we're not really going to get anywhere on this issue. And we're going to keep talking, like we're going to keep fooling ourselves into thinking we're talking about AI. We're really talking about ourselves. Okay, I think that's just about enough on this for now. I'm sure we'll come back to AI a bunch, but we should talk about our favorite pieces on the site because we want to encourage people to read the damn site.
Yes.
Do you want to go first?
No, you go first.
Okay. We published a piece by Jeremy Carl called A More Than Material Matter. And Jeremy is, a Claremont guy, a friend of ours, and he had this tweet that I saw about this guy, this Florida state representative, Webster Barnaby. And you got to watch the original video because it's truly, it's hard not to sort of have a certain affection for this guy. He's talking about sort of this transgender craze movement. And he says, "The Lord rebuke you, Satan, and all of your demons and all of your imps." And he goes, you want to see the real version of the thing that like Justin Pearson and Justin Jones are always imitating, like mimicking in their public statements where they're like, yes, like Mother God, this whole thing. Like this guy, Barnaby, is like the real deal. And he sort of goes on this thing. And Jeremy had this tweet about like, this is the only language that actually even makes sense of what we're looking at, is like sort of spiritual language. And to try to reduce it to like purely secular description is just a losing game because we're dealing with something more than just like you can't give an account of why this is wrong and bad without referring to the supernatural, the human soul. That's the language that captures what's going on. And so I asked him to write this up for us in a piece, and he did so very beautifully. A More Than Material Matter, it's called, and you can find it at AmericanMind.org. I won't go through his whole argument because you should go read it, but yeah, it's really good, and I'm kind of hammering this point home wherever I can with whomever I can get to join me. That like at a certain point, you're not going to get this across. You're not going to understand what's going on without reference to spiritual things.
I did like that piece. It was really interesting. The piece that I choose is by a writer of ours named Robert Thornett. It's called Digital Dictatorships. And he kind of makes an interesting point. I don't know if it's like how far you want to push it, but he's talking about, the way in which governments, including ours, are really invested in data collection and artificial intelligence to monitor and manage and control people. But he sort of makes a funny analogy. He looks at like the history of the East India Company, the British, in England and India, and the way in which they gave birth to Orientalism, the control of India and the Raj, like gave birth to this kind of this typically English fascination with the ins and outs of the local culture. And, it's sort of like what you see in like a Kipling, like in Kim, is maybe the end of this fascination with the human level. And then later it became much more sort of, I guess you'd call it data driven. And that's why the Sepoy Rebellion came as such a massive surprise, because they had lost touch with the human level. And, tens of thousands of people died, and it was a huge disaster, and so forth. It's an interesting point. I don't know, if you want to, how far you want to push it, but, he says the over-reliance on statistical data can lead to misperceptions and knowledge gaps. So, it's an interesting point. Worth reading.
I really like that point. And it's very in keeping with a lot of what we've been talking about. today, actually, especially at the end there. And on top of that, what's kind of interesting about that piece is this is not the first time that the history of the East India Company has sort of suggested itself as an important analog for our moment. I remember back when DeSantis was having his spat with Disney, I sort of got down this rabbit hole and I was like, this is really like the closest thing to this, or the best set of categories for thinking about this is from like Edmund Burke's accusations against William Pitt and the East India Company. I have this book on my desk that my mom gave me, and she listens to every episode of the podcast. So, hi, mom. I'm gonna get to this book. I just haven't yet, but it's called The Anarchy, and it's like a weighty history of the East India Company and its various, I don't know, excesses and abuses.
Okay.
And yeah, I don't know. There's something to this. I think it keeps coming back up. So this is reminding me that I need to read that book as well. Well, anyway, the piece is called Digital Dictatorships. It's at AmericanMind.org. Currently, as I'm saying this, it's right up on the front page, although it may have been superseded by something else by the time you hear this. You'll still be able to find it, though. And with that, I'm going to thank you all for listening and tell you about some other websites that you should visit. You should go to ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com to read our other sister publication, the Claremont Review of Books. You should subscribe to get the Dead Tree copy in your mailbox, because it really is, I think, a pleasure to rifle through. And we're also releasing this week a new episode of our CRB podcast, The Close Read, which I'm going to plug. I don't always do that, but it's really fun. It's me and one author from the issue every episode, sort of sit down and interview them about the ideas in their pieces. And these are weighty, substantial essays, and so they kind of merit close attention with the author. So Close Read, subscribe to that as well as to this podcast. When it comes to the Roundtable in the American Mind, do not forget to subscribe and give us 5 stars. If you haven't done that already, if you're listening and you're enjoying this and you want to get the word out, that's the number one way. Just give us 5 stars, subscribe, and donate to support our work at claremont.org/donate. We really appreciate when you do that. That's how we keep the lights on. So thank you to all of our donors. Visit our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org. And I believe that's all. Of course, as I've said now already, AmericanMind.org is where you'll find our site, and lots of stuff worth reading on there, not just the pieces that Seth and I mentioned, but lots more as well. Thank you to our production and engineering team, Jake Gannon and Blaze Ebner, and thank you all for listening.